In the first video, we proposed that constraints may help preserve orientation and increase the probability of reaching closure, aligned with an initial objective. In the second video, we explored asymmetry through large space navigation. Using chess as an example, we proposed that differences in navigation capacity may generate cognitive fatigue and increase the probability of resignation. In the third video, we examined sustained cognitive load. We proposed that when memory, conflict, novelty, and urgency remain active over time, alignment with the initial objective may progressively deteriorate. As divergence grows, closure may become less likely, increasing the probability of leaving the task unfinished. These three propositions point toward a common issue, not whether activity continues, but whether activity remains aligned with the objective that started it. Recent human AI work makes this question more concrete. On one side, Matta describes deferred closure. Human AI interaction may maintain an open inquiry horizon, rather than converging toward a fixed conclusion. In this case, the interaction remains open. Closure is delayed. The user continues moving. On the other side, Liu describes premature closure. When low or loose closure standards are accepted, shallow answers may become good enough, before the deeper objective is met. In this case, the interaction closes too early. Closure is reached, but not necessarily on the original task. So we have two different observations. One points to closure being extended. The other points to closure being weakened. But both concern the same object: closure conditions during human-AI interaction. In each case, the central concern was not whether activity continued, but whether that activity remained aligned with the original objective. If human-AI interaction can modify the conditions under which closure occurs, the navigation itself becomes important. In this video, we propose that human-AI interaction may combine navigation asymmetry and sustained cognitive load into a self-reinforcing process that progressively alters closure conditions. To understand how this may happen, we must first examine the mechanism operating beneath the interaction itself. We will now present the proposed sequence of events underlying the interaction. Step by step, we examine the mechanism through which navigation may progressively alter closure conditions and increase the probability of divergence from an initial objective. The following model is exploratory in nature. It is proposed as a working synthesis of existing observations and literature rather than as a scientifically validated theory. Its purpose is to identify potential sources of friction and generate testable hypotheses for future investigation. Initial framing. Every interaction begins with an initial framing. A user enters a request. At the same time, they implicitly define what would count as a satisfactory answer. These two elements establish the starting conditions of the interaction. If the framing is weak, navigation begins from an unstable foundation. Navigation. Once the interaction begins, navigation begins. Here, navigation means the ongoing process of prompting, receiving an answer, evaluating that answer, adjusting direction, and prompting again. Every response creates possible directions. Every prompt modifies the trajectory. The longer navigation continues, the more important orientation becomes. Asymmetry experienced. During navigation, the user encounters an asymmetry. The system can generate alternatives, reformulations, and candidate paths faster than the user can evaluate them. As the space expands, maintaining a stable representation of the task becomes increasingly difficult. This asymmetry creates the first source of pressure inside navigation. Stressors activation. As asymmetry grows, 4 stressors become active. The user must remember the objective. compare competing alternatives, evaluate novel information, and decide when the result is good enough. The interaction is no longer only producing answers. It is demanding continuous management. These stressors create the conditions for sustained cognitive load. Sustained cognitive load. When these stressors remain active over time, cognitive load accumulates. The user must maintain orientation while simultaneously processing new information. Working memory becomes increasingly occupied. Executive resources become increasingly taxed. As load accumulates, uncertainty becomes harder to tolerate. Need for closure. When uncertainty becomes harder to tolerate, the desire for resolution increases. The user wants the interaction to converge. They want the loop to close. Need for closure does not stop navigation by itself, but it increases the pressure to reach a conclusion. Cost of effort increases. At the same time, navigation remains cognitively expensive. Comparing alternatives requires effort. Verifying outputs require effort. Maintaining the original objective requires effort. The task may still appear to progress, but the cost of staying fully engaged is rising. Alternative paths become more attractive. Now, two pressures meet. The user wants closure, and the current path is becoming costly. Under these conditions, alternative paths become more attractive. A shortcut, a simplification, a partial answer, a different branch. These alternatives promise immediate relief from cognitive demand. This creates the conditions for low-effort responses. Low-effort response pattern. Low-effort response patterns can now become more likely. The user may accept an answer prematurely, move to a new branch before evaluating the previous one, or re-prompt before fully assessing the current result. Each action reduces immediate effort, but each action can also weaken alignment with the original objective. Re-engagement. In a conversational interface, the primary available action is another prompt. So instead of stopping, the user may re-engage. Another prompt, another refinement, another attempt. The cycle begins again, but it does not restart from the original state. It restarts from the current state, and each cycle carries forward the effects of the previous one. Divergence from initial objective. Over time, repeated cycles can gradually alter the relationship between the current interaction and their original objective. Divergence does not necessarily appear as failure. It may appear as progress. The interaction continues. Answers continue to arrive. The question is whether the interaction is still moving toward the objective defined at the beginning, or whether navigation itself has become the destination. We have proposed a mechanism through which human-AI interaction may progressively diverge from an initial objective. If this model is useful, then the next question is no longer what happens. The next question is what can be changed. By identifying the sources of friction operating within the interaction, it becomes possible to identify variables that may be adjusted. Those variables, in turn, create opportunities for intervention. We now transition from diagnosis to design.